Silent authority defeats arrogance appears at first as a contradiction, because authority is often associated with volume, dominance, and visible control, while silence is misread as weakness or passivity. In environments ruled by fear or intimidation, loud behavior sets the tone, and arrogance thrives because it feeds on reaction. The louder the bully, the more power they believe they hold. Silent authority operates on an entirely different frequency. It does not compete for attention. It commands it without asking. This form of authority unsettles arrogance precisely because it refuses to play the expected role. Arrogant individuals are conditioned to provoke, to push boundaries until resistance appears. When resistance does not come, when there is no visible anger or fear to feed on, their sense of control begins to fracture. Silence becomes a mirror, forcing the arrogant person to confront themselves without distraction. Calm observation communicates confidence far more effectively than confrontation ever could. It signals that the person in control does not need validation, approval, or dominance displays to assert their position. Viewers instinctively recognize this dynamic because it mirrors real-life power structures, where the most influential figures are often the least reactive. Silent authority also shifts the emotional center of the scene. Instead of chaos dictating the rhythm, composure sets the pace. Every pause feels deliberate, every measured response feels intentional. This creates tension not through conflict escalation but through restraint, which is far more psychologically gripping. Arrogance depends on predictability. It expects outrage, submission, or fear. Silent authority denies all three, creating uncertainty. That uncertainty is where power quietly transfers. The audience senses the imbalance long before it becomes explicit, which drives retention and emotional investment. Silence in this context is not absence, but presence, distilled to its purest form. It communicates boundaries without stating them, confidence without boasting, and inevitability without threat. The arrogant character continues to act out, unaware that each display only reinforces their lack of real control. Silent authority does not rush the moment because it does not need to win immediately. It understands timing, context, and consequence. That patience reads as dominance on a deeper level, making the eventual outcome feel earned rather than forced. The audience experiences satisfaction not because someone was overpowered, but because arrogance collapsed under the weight of its own noise, while authority remained intact, composed, and inevitable, reshaping the entire dynamic without ever raising its voice, allowing the silence itself to do the work of dismantling false power and exposing the fragility beneath bravado and posturing. As the imbalance grows more obvious with every unreciprocated provocation, bully faces consequences he never expected, taps into a universal emotional current rooted in anticipation and justice. Bullies operate on assumption that their actions will go unchecked, that fear guarantees compliance, and that systems exist to protect them or look away. This belief is reinforced every time authority hesitates or peers remain silent. The phrase, "never expected," is critical because it signals a break from the pattern the bully relies on. Consequences are not immediate or reactive. They are delayed, measured, and unexpected, which makes them far more impactful. The bully believes the situation is under control because nothing has happened yet. This false security encourages escalation, which deepens the eventual fall. From a narrative psychology standpoint, delayed consequences heighten engagement because viewers subconsciously track the imbalance, waiting for resolution. Each unchecked act adds tension, creating a mental ledger that demands payoff. When consequences finally arrive, they feel heavier because they contrast sharply with the bully's confidence moments earlier. Importantly, these consequences are not framed as revenge, but as inevitability. Importantly, these consequences are not as inevitability. This distinction keeps the narrative morally grounded and emotionally satisfying. The bully is not destroyed by an individual but by the system they underestimated, the rules they ignored, and the authority they failed to recognize. This mirrors real-world justice fantasies where viewers long to see accountability without chaos. The unexpected nature of the consequence also reframes the bully's intelligence. What once looked like control is revealed as short-sightedness. Confidence turns into shock, bravado into disbelief. This emotional reversal is powerful because it strips the bully of their narrative dominance. They are no longer the one dictating the scene, they are reacting within it. The audience experiences a surge of validation as the power imbalance corrects itself. This type of consequence resonates deeply because it reassures viewers that patterns of intimidation are not sustainable even when they appear unstoppable. The bully's realization is often subtle at first, a hesitation, a flicker of doubt, a shift in body language. These micro moments are crucial because they humanize the fall without excusing the behavior. The audience watches as certainty dissolves, replaced by confusion and fear, emotions the bully once inflicted on others. The unexpected consequence also reinforces a broader theme. Power built on fear is fragile. It only works as long as everyone believes in it. The moment authority asserts itself calmly and decisively, the illusion collapses. Viewers remain engaged because they are not just watching punishment. They are witnessing a worldview being dismantled. The bully's internal framework fails, and with it, their ability to dominate. This kind of narrative payoff sustains long watch times because it delivers emotional closure through accountability rather than spectacle, allowing the audience to feel that balance has been restored, not through force, but through consequence that feels unavoidable, justified, and deeply satisfying as the realization sets in and the weight of their actions becomes impossible to escape. Power shift happens in plain sight is compelling because it subverts the expectation that power changes are loud, dramatic, or immediately visible. Most people assume power is taken through confrontation, announcements, or force, yet the most effective shifts occur quietly, often while everyone is looking but not truly seeing. In environments dominated by intimidation, people become conditioned to watch the obvious signals: raised voices, threats, physical presence. This conditioning blinds them to subtler cues, such as who is listening, who is gathering information, and who is unaffected by the noise. A power shift in plain sight relies on this blindness. The individual gaining power does not interrupt the existing order, they study it. They allow others to reveal themselves fully, exposing patterns, weaknesses, and assumptions. Every unchecked action by the dominant figure becomes evidence. Every moment of arrogance becomes a liability. Observers sense something changing but cannot articulate it because nothing outwardly dramatic has occurred. This creates a quiet tension that pulls viewers in as they begin to notice details they might otherwise ignore. Body language shifts, reactions slow, confidence becomes performative rather than natural. The dominant figure continues to act as if control is permanent, unaware that control is already slipping. The power shift is not marked by a single moment but by accumulation. It builds through restraint, patience, and clarity of purpose. Those who understand this kind of power do not rush to reveal it because early exposure invites resistance. Instead, they allow the environment to reach a point where the shift feels inevitable rather than imposed. When the moment arrives, it feels sudden only to those who were not paying attention. For everyone else, it feels earned. This is why such narratives have high rewatch value. Viewers return to earlier scenes and recognize the clues they missed, realizing that the outcome was visible all along. Power in plain sight operates through legitimacy rather than dominance. It aligns with rules, structure, and moral authority, which makes it harder to challenge once it surfaces. The previous power holder is left exposed, not because they were attacked, but because they overplayed their position. Their authority depended on silence from others, not respect. When that silence ends, even calmly, the illusion collapses. This kind of shift resonates deeply because it reflects real-life dynamics in workplaces, schools, and institutions, where change often comes not from rebellion but from recognition. The audience feels satisfaction because the shift validates patience and awareness over impulsiveness. Nothing needed to explode for everything to change. The environment itself adjusted once true authority stepped forward, and what once seemed immovable suddenly appeared fragile, revealing that power was never where everyone thought it was, but where discipline, observation, and timing quietly converged, in full view of everyone watching without realizing they were witnessing the transfer as it unfolded naturally, through moments that felt ordinary but carried irreversible weight. The most dangerous person is the one who observes, challenges the assumption that danger is loud, aggressive, or visibly threatening. Observation is often mistaken for passivity, yet it is one of the most powerful tools in any social hierarchy. The observer gathers information without revealing intent, which creates an asymmetry of awareness. While others act, react, and expose their motivations, the observer remains unreadable. This imbalance is what makes them dangerous, not in a violent sense, but in their capacity to understand systems and people more deeply than those around them. Observation allows patterns to emerge. Who dominates conversations? Who avoids eye contact? Who interrupts? Who stays silent? Who enforces rules selectively? These details form a map of power that is invisible to those caught up in performance. The observer does not need to assert themselves prematurely because their strength lies in knowing when and how to act. This restraint is unsettling to those who rely on predictability. Bullies, manipulators, and loud authority figures depend on immediate feedback. They need reactions to calibrate their behavior. The observer denies them this feedback, creating discomfort and uncertainty. Over time, this uncertainty erodes confidence. The observer also sees beyond individual actions to their consequences. They understand how fear spreads, how silence enables misconduct, and how systems fail when accountability is inconsistent. This perspective allows them to intervene with precision rather than force. When they finally act, it appears decisive and overwhelming because it is informed. The audience instinctively respects this kind of character because they embody control without aggression. There is no wasted motion, no emotional leakage, no need to prove anything. The danger lies in their preparedness. They already know what will happen before others realize they are part of a larger pattern. This makes their eventual involvement feel like a reveal rather than a reaction. Observers also shift the narrative focus. Instead of chaos driving the story, awareness does. The tension comes from waiting, from knowing that the observer sees everything and is choosing when to intervene. This choice is critical. Acting too early would reduce impact. Acting too late would allow harm to continue. The observer understands this balance intuitively. Their presence becomes a stabilizing force even before they speak. Others sense it subconsciously. Conversations change tone, behavior becomes cautious, and arrogance begins to feel risky. This subtle influence is powerful because it does not rely on authority titles or threat. It relies on perception. People behave differently when they feel seen, even if nothing is said. The observer weaponizes attention, not by staring down others, but by noticing what others ignore. This makes them unpredictable to those who rely on intimidation. When the observer finally speaks or acts, it reframes everything that came before. Past actions are no longer isolated incidents. They are part of a documented pattern. This reframing removes excuses and justifications. The observer's calm delivery amplifies the impact because it signals confidence in the truth rather than emotion. Viewers find this deeply satisfying because it aligns with a desire for intelligent justice rather than impulsive retaliation. The observer does not need to escalate because escalation has already occurred through accumulated behavior. Their intervention feels less like confrontation and more like revelation. The danger they pose is not physical but existential to false power structures. They expose fragility where strength was assumed, intention where randomness was claimed, and accountability where immunity was expected, shifting the balance simply by understanding it better than anyone else and choosing the moment when understanding becomes action without warning or spectacle. Respect is enforced without violence functions as a powerful corrective to the assumption that order can only be restored through force. In many social environments, especially those shaped by intimidation, respect is mistaken for fear because fear produces immediate compliance. Violence or aggression appears efficient, decisive, and dominant on the surface. However, this efficiency is fragile and short-lived. It requires constant reinforcement, escalation, and spectacle to maintain control. True respect operates differently. It is enforced through consistency, clarity, and consequence rather than physical domination. When respect is enforced without violence, it signals a system that is confident in its legitimacy. Rules are not suggestions, but neither are they threats. They exist as boundaries that apply regardless of who is testing them. This approach disarms those who expect confrontation. Aggressors often prepare themselves mentally for resistance, for shouting matches or physical pushback. When that response never arrives, they are left without a script. Calm enforcement removes the emotional fuel that aggression relies on. It reframes the interaction from a personal conflict into a structural reality. The individual enforcing respect does not need to win an argument or overpower someone. They only need to uphold standards consistently. This consistency is what builds authority. Over time, people internalize expectations not because they are afraid of punishment, but because the system proves reliable. Respect enforced without violence also creates psychological safety for observers. When people see that order is maintained calmly, they are more likely to trust leadership and participate honestly. Fear silences voices, respect invites them. This distinction is crucial in environments like schools, workplaces, or institutions where long-term stability matters. Violence creates submission, but it also creates resentment, secrecy, and rebellion. Nonviolent enforcement creates predictability. Everyone understands where the lines are and what happens when they are crossed. This clarity reduces chaos more effectively than intimidation ever could. From a narrative perspective, this dynamic is deeply satisfying because it restores balance without glorifying harm. The audience witnesses authority asserting itself in a way that feels mature, controlled, and ethical. The absence of violence heightens the impact of consequences because it shifts focus from the act to the choice. The person who disrespects the rules cannot claim provocation or self-defense. Their behavior stands alone. This accountability is what makes the enforcement feel fair. Calm authority also exposes the weakness of aggression. When violence is met with composure, it looks excessive and unjustified. The aggressor becomes visibly out of step with the environment. Their behavior appears childish, reckless, or desperate rather than powerful. This social reframing is more damaging to false authority than any physical response. Respect enforced without violence relies on collective recognition. Once people see that calm authority holds, they begin to align with it. Silence shifts sides. What once enabled intimidation now supports order. The enforcer does not need to demand respect because the environment begins to reflect it naturally. This transformation is subtle but profound. It demonstrates that strength does not require spectacle and that control rooted in principles outlasts control rooted in fear, reshaping the power dynamic through measured action, unwavering standards, and the quiet certainty that rules mean something regardless of who challenges them. When intimidation finally fails, captures the moment where a long-standing pattern collapses under its own weight. Intimidation thrives on repetition and belief. It only works as long as people expect it to work. The intimidator depends on predictability, on the assumption that others will freeze, comply, or look away. Each successful act reinforces their confidence and deepens the silence around them. Over time, intimidation becomes normalized, mistaken for strength or leadership. The failure of intimidation is rarely dramatic at first. It begins with subtle resistance, often unnoticed by the intimidator themselves. A lack of reaction, a calm response, a refusal to escalate. These moments disrupt the expected feedback loop. The intimidator pushes harder, assuming the usual outcome will follow. Instead, they encounter neutrality or structure. This is deeply destabilizing. Intimidation relies on emotional dominance. When emotion is removed from the exchange, the tactic loses effectiveness. The intimidator finds themselves exposed, performing aggression without an audience that validates it. The failure becomes visible not through punishment alone, but through loss of influence. Others stop responding the way they used to. Fear no longer spreads as easily. Silence no longer protects the intimidator, it isolates them. From the outside, this shift feels inevitable, but from the inside, it feels sudden. The intimidator is often the last to realize what is happening. They misinterpret calm as weakness and persistence as control. This miscalculation accelerates their downfall. Each attempt to reassert dominance only highlights how little power they actually have. Once the environment stops cooperating, the moment intimidation fails, it reveals how dependent it was on collective compliance. Without that compliance, it is just noise. This realization is devastating because it strips the intimidator of their identity. What they believed made them untouchable is revealed as contingent and fragile. Narratively, this moment resonates because it fulfills a deep desire for accountability without cruelty. The audience watches as the intimidator confronts the consequences of their own choices, not because someone overpowered them, but because their strategy no longer works. The system asserts itself calmly, exposing the limits of fear-based control. This failure also empowers bystanders. Seeing intimidation fail breaks the spell it holds over a group. People recognize that the power they attributed to one person was exaggerated. Courage becomes contagious once fear loses credibility. The environment shifts rapidly after that realization. Behavior adjusts, alliances change, and the intimidator finds themselves unsupported. Their attempts to regain control feel increasingly desperate and disconnected from reality. The failure is complete when intimidation no longer commands attention, when it becomes background noise rather than a governing force. This collapse is psychologically rich because it reframes dominance as dependency. The intimidator depended on fear, silence, and hesitation. Once those are gone, there is nothing left to sustain their authority. The audience experiences satisfaction not because someone was humiliated, but because an unhealthy dynamic ended. Intimidation failing represents a return to balance, where rules matter more than threats, and composure outlasts aggression, leaving the intimidator to face the consequences of a system that no longer bends around them. Calm words carry heavy consequences reveals how language, when stripped of emotion and excess, becomes far more powerful than shouting or threats. Calm words signal certainty. They are not searching for agreement or dominance. They assume legitimacy. This is unsettling to those who rely on noise to control situations because calm speech removes the illusion that power is being contested. When someone speaks calmly in the face of provocation, it communicates that the outcome is already decided. There is no urgency, no need to convince, no fear of backlash. Each measured sentence feels intentional, weighted, and irreversible. Calm words force listeners to confront meaning rather than emotion. They shift attention from how something is said to what is being said, and more importantly, to what will follow. Consequences delivered calmly feel heavier because they are not fueled by anger. Anger can be dismissed as impulse or bias. Calm cannot. It suggests preparation, authority, and foresight. Those on the receiving end often realize too late that the conversation was never a debate, but a declaration. Calm words also deny aggressors the satisfaction of reaction. Without emotional feedback, they lose leverage. The weight of calm speech lies in its finality. It does not threaten, it informs. It does not escalate, it concludes. The listener feels the gravity not in volume, but in certainty, understanding that what has been said will stand regardless of protest, making the aftermath unavoidable. The moment everyone realizes who's really in charge is rarely marked by an announcement. It happens subtly, often in silence. When behavior shifts across a room, conversations trail off, movements slow, and attention realigns without instruction. This moment is powerful because it is collective. One person may sense authority early, but when everyone recognizes it at once, the dynamic changes instantly. The realization comes not from force, but from alignment. Authority reveals itself through consistency, composure, and clarity. Those who believed they held control begin to hesitate. Their confidence falters because they sense that their influence no longer shapes outcomes. Others stop looking to them for cues. This transfer of attention is decisive. Control follows attention, and once it moves, it rarely returns. The person truly in charge does not need to assert dominance. The environment reflects it back to them. This moment feels inevitable in hindsight, as if the structure had been waiting for someone capable of holding it. The realization spreads quietly but completely, leaving no confusion about where decisions now originate and whose presence defines the rules everyone will follow. Fear versus respect, the difference is revealed, becomes clear when behavior changes in the absence of pressure. Fear controls through avoidance and silence. People comply to minimize risk, not because they agree or believe in the system. The moment fear weakens, obedience dissolves. Respect functions differently. It persists even when no one is watching. When respect governs an environment, rules are followed because they are understood, not because punishment looms. The revelation occurs when authority is tested calmly. Fear-based control reacts aggressively, escalating to maintain dominance. Respect-based authority responds with consistency, reinforcing boundaries without emotion. Observers feel the difference immediately. Fear tightens the atmosphere. Respect steadies it. One creates tension, the other creates order. When fear is exposed, it looks brittle. It requires constant reinforcement and grows louder when challenged. Respect grows quieter because it does not need to prove itself. This contrast reshapes how people align themselves. They withdraw from fear, but gravitate toward respect, sensing stability rather than threat, choosing trust over survival instinct. One decision changes an entire school, illustrates how systemic shifts often begin with a single deliberate choice. Environments shaped by dysfunction rarely collapse all at once. They persist through small compromises and unchallenged behavior. Change interrupts that pattern. One decision made clearly and upheld consistently signals that the rules now matter. This decision becomes a reference point. People measure their behavior against it, recalibrating expectations. The impact spreads outward. Those who felt powerless gain confidence, while those who exploited the system lose leverage. The decision does not need to be dramatic, it needs to be firm. Its power lies in follow-through. Once people see that the choice is not negotiable, they adapt. The culture shifts because uncertainty disappears. Everyone understands where boundaries stand, and predictability replaces fear, altering how students interact, how authority is perceived, and how accountability becomes part of daily life. The day control was taken back is not defined by a single dramatic act, but by the collapse of an illusion that had been maintained for far too long. Control, when built on intimidation, is never truly owned. It is borrowed from the fear of others. The day it is taken back is the day that fear stops cooperating. What makes this moment powerful is that it often appears ordinary on the surface. There is no uprising, no loud rebellion, no sudden chaos. Instead, there is clarity. Someone recognizes that the rules have always existed and decides to enforce them without apology or hesitation. This decision immediately disrupts the unspoken agreement that allowed false control to flourish. Those who benefited from intimidation sense the change first. Their confidence wavers because they feel resistance without confrontation. They speak, but their words no longer command attention. They move, but others no longer move aside. Control begins to slip not because someone challenges them directly, but because the environment stops reinforcing their dominance. This shift exposes how dependent their authority was on collective submission. The day control is taken back, silence changes meaning. What was once fear-driven quiet becomes watchful stillness. People are no longer holding their breath. They are observing. They are waiting to see if the shift will hold. Control taken back must be steady, not reactive. Any sign of hesitation would invite the old order to reassert itself. Instead, consistency becomes the defining feature of the new balance. Decisions are made calmly. Boundaries are enforced evenly. Consequences follow actions without exception. This predictability stabilizes the environment quickly. Those who once felt invisible begin to occupy space differently. They speak more freely, move with less caution, and engage without calculating risk. The psychological weight lifts, replaced by a sense of structure. The former controller experiences this as loss, but in reality it is a correction. They were never meant to hold that power. Their reaction often reveals how fragile their position always was. Anger, disbelief, bargaining, and denial surface because they cannot accept that control was conditional. The day control is taken back forces them to confront a truth they avoided. Power is granted by systems, not seized through fear. This realization is destabilizing because it strips them of identity as well as influence. Control taken back does not humiliate, it neutralizes. It removes the ability to dominate without replacing it with retaliation. The environment becomes governed by rules rather than personalities. This transition feels profound because it restores balance without chaos. Observers recognize that something fundamental has changed. The day will be remembered not for noise but for clarity, for the moment when intimidation stopped working and accountability began functioning, for the realization that control had always belonged to those willing to uphold standards, not those willing to break them. This kind of reclaiming resonates deeply because it affirms a belief many hold but rarely see proven, that fairness can prevail without force, that authority can be restored without cruelty, and that systems can correct themselves when someone has the discipline to act decisively and the patience to let structure do the work, transforming an environment that once revolved around fear into one that operates on consistency, legitimacy, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing control no longer depends on intimidation. A lesson learned too late carries a different emotional weight because it centers not on victory but on irreversible realization. This lesson is not delivered through speeches or punishment alone, it is understood through loss. The individual at the center often believed they had time, immunity, or leverage. They misread tolerance as weakness and silence as approval. Each unchallenged action reinforced the belief that consequences were negotiable or avoidable. By the time the lesson arrives, the opportunity to change has already passed. This is what makes it powerful. The realization comes after the point of reversal, when apologies no longer alter outcomes and explanations no longer matter. The lesson is learned not intellectually, but emotionally. It settles in as regret, shock, and disbelief. The individual begins to replay moments they dismissed, warnings they ignored, and chances they squandered. They recognize patterns only after they are held accountable for them. This delayed awareness creates a sense of tragedy without requiring sympathy. The audience does not excuse the behavior, but they understand the weight of missed opportunity. A lesson learned too late reinforces the idea that accountability is not cruel. It is indifferent to intent once harm is done. Systems cannot wait indefinitely for individuals to mature or self-correct. There is a point where behavior defines outcome regardless of potential. This truth resonates because it reflects real life, where second chances are not unlimited and timing matters. The individual often tries to reclaim control through familiar tactics, but those tactics fail because the context has changed. Their words no longer carry influence. Their presence no longer commands attention. They are forced into a position they never imagined occupying, reacting instead of directing. This reversal is psychologically intense because it strips away self-esteem. They must confront the gap between who they believed they were and how they are now perceived. The lesson is not simply that actions have consequences, but that perception solidifies faster than expected. Reputations form, patterns harden, and systems respond to behavior, not promises. Learning this too late means living with the outcome rather than correcting course. The audience experiences this as sobering rather than celebratory. It reinforces the narrative's moral grounding. The goal was never humiliation, but accountability. The lesson learned too late serves as a cautionary element for observers. It communicates that awareness without action is meaningless, and that power misused eventually attracts scrutiny. This kind of lesson lingers because it does not resolve neatly. There is no redemption arc within the moment, there is only understanding, arriving after consequence. This makes the story feel realistic and emotionally grounded. It avoids glorifying downfall while still affirming justice. The individual's realization stands as evidence that control based on fear delays growth and accelerates collapse. By the time the lesson is understood, the structure has already shifted, the rules have been enforced, and the outcome has been sealed, leaving reflection as the only remaining response and making the lesson permanent, heavy, and inescapable, not because someone wanted to teach it, but because the system finally required it. If this story made you pause for even a second, that pause matters. It means you felt the shift before it was spoken, the moment where silence carried more weight than noise, and choices began to matter. Stories like this aren't just about what happens on screen. They're about recognizing patterns we see every day but rarely talk about. Power, respect, consequences, and the moments when everything quietly changes. If you value stories that don't rely on shouting or spectacle, stories where patience outlasts intimidation and clarity reshapes the room, then this channel was made for you. Subscribing isn't just about watching the next story. It's about becoming part of a community that understands that real strength is calm, measured, and intentional. If this message resonated, let it be known. Like the video so it reaches others who need to see it. Share it with someone who understands what it means to stay composed when tested. And leave a comment below telling us the exact moment you realized the balance had shifted. Those conversations matter more than you think. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Every story here is crafted to challenge assumptions, reward attention, and remind you that consequences don't always arrive loudly, but they always arrive. Stay with us, because the next story may reveal something you didn't expect, and sometimes awareness is the most powerful takeaway of all.